Yeah, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me again. Looking forward to doing this talk on the north and west of Australia with a little dip into the centre as well. For those that don't remember or weren't on the last call, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Andy Walker. I've been guiding for birding Ecotours for the last 5 or 6 years, but I've been guiding for 20 years before that in total in Costa Rica and various other places around the world. My role in the company is basically overseeing all the European, Asian and Australasian tours. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing this talk on Australia today. This is the place where I spend a good 6 months of my year in any usual year. I'm not going to be getting there this year because of COVID, unfortunately. So all of our tours for this year have been delayed to next year. Some of them are more or less fully booked, but there are a few places on some of them. And if anyone would like any information, yeah, please just let me know at the end, and I'll be happy to send some stuff through. Last time I talked on about the east coast of Australia, so that was including Tasmania, and this is going to be the other side of Australia, as Luke mentioned, and I'll make a crack on it, and hopefully we'll get done roughly on time. Apologies in advance if we go over. Feel free to save any questions up to the end, or between each section I'll also ask if anyone's got any specifics at that point. But any general questions, try and leave those to the end, but anything specific to what I've just talked about, feel free to drop those into the chat. Okay, well, welcome to my talk, and let's get going. This is the Blue-breasted Fairywren from Western Australia on the front cover here. We will get to that at the end of the tour. Let's see if this works. Okay, so let's have a quick look at where Australia is. So, okay, the last map I put up on the first talk I did was similar to this. This is just showing we're going a little bit further over to the west of Australia, and the arrow there is pointing to Darwin in the north of the Northern Territory. So this is in the red box is where we're going to be focusing on today. It's roughly 8,000 miles from Arizona. We're going to be focusing on the Northern Territory, and that's Darwin in the top end, and the red centre of Alice Springs, and Western Australia. These are huge states. We're not focusing on all of them. We're going to be looking at these smaller areas within those. So you can see on the screen 3 red dots. The dot star at the top is around Darwin. In the middle is Alice Springs, and in the southwest of Australia near Perth is the southwest Australia. So these are the rough areas we're going to be looking at during the talk. And just to put it into perspective of the size of Australia, it's basically the equivalent of starting in central Saskatchewan, and then going down to about South Dakota, and then going down to about Los Angeles. So that gives you a size, an idea of the size and scale of Australia. And it's very easy to underestimate the size of the place, to be honest. But it's a huge continent country. And we're going to probably cover about 2,500 kilometers across that region. So some facts about Australia, just general overall facts. According to the IOC taxonomy, there's currently 977 species of birds. A good 300 of those are endemic. 378 mammals on land, 50 marine mammals, 950 reptiles, 4,000 species of fish, and overall 80% of the wildlife is endemic to Australia. So it's one of those really amazing places to go. It's one of the oldest continents on the world, oldest countries and continents on the world. It drifted off many millions of years ago, and so has evolved a huge endemic fauna and flora. So basically, the three areas of the tour that we're going to cover are three tours that I offer in Australia, just summarised into very quick bursts of birds, essentially, and some of the wildlife that we get on those areas. So the first area we're going to look at is what's known as the top end. So that's north of the Northern Territory. Darwin is the main city there with a big, nice international airport. And there's a very nice little circuit, short nine-day circuit that runs around the north there. So it starts in Darwin, which has some amazing city birding. There's mangroves, there's monsoon forest, there's lots of beaches, there's some nice botanic gardens, there's a mix of eucalyptus forest. And then we go east through Mary River, which is a nice dry eucalyptus area, into Kakadu National Park. That's a World Heritage Site. It's very famous for its rock art that's dated back thousands and thousands of years. So there's a nice cultural aspect there. The landscape there is really stunningly beautiful with lots of sandstone escarpments. And then and a monsoon rainforest there as well. Then we go down to a little town called Pine Creek, which is a very dry area. There's a few specialist birds in that area that I'll get to on the talk, and then complete back to Darwin. So the birds that I'm going to show you in the next segment, this first segment, are basically found around this area. There is some overlap with the birds that are found in the east. To try and save on time, I've not included all of the birds that I included on the eastern side that also occur here. This area is one of the most birdy in Australia. You've got so many habitats. In Kakadu National Park, you've got the nice forest and sandstone. There's amazing rivers in there. There's lots of water holes that can be absolutely teeming with birds. Absolutely spectacular. So let's get going, and let's go and have a look at some birds here. Okay, so we're going to start off in the city, as I mentioned, and some of the common birds that you get around the city, things like Brahminy kite, Pacific reef heron. These ones are loitering around the edge of a channels, chasing after crabs. Also chasing after crabs, the Terresian Kingfisher. It's one of the beautiful birds of Australia, really. And also out on the beach, the beach stone curlew. This is a huge shorebird. It's about 65 centimeters tall. So it's a big bird, scarce and sparsely distributed. So always good to see that one. Also present on the water in the north, Raja shelduck. Very nice white eye on this bird. But one of the main species that we look for in the mangroves around Darwin is this bird, the Chestnut Rail. It's quite a secretive bird usually, and this one was atypical and actually walked out in the open in the sun. Usually you don't get views as great as this, but this was a pretty spectacular moment to get fantastic views of this bird walking around in the open. There is one other thing to keep an eye out for in the mangroves, and you've got to be very careful and watch out for crocodiles. They're all around the mangroves in this area, so you do have to pay a lot of attention to your surroundings at all times. Other birds in this general area include things like the greater crested tern. And this one you might think looks like a gull-billed tern. That's because it was until recently. It's fairly recently been split as Australian tern, a bird that's found in that part of Australia. There are some interesting other birds here too. Honeyeaters, a family of birds are prevalent in Australia. Loads of different species, and on these three tours you see a really nice mix going from north through the centre down to the southwest. This is Rufus-throated honeyeater. Some of them are quite drab with subtle bits of colour. Others of them are a bit brighter, like this yellow honeyeater. This one's a very common bird. Then there's yellow-tinted honeyeater. And then a large bird here called the blue-faced honeyeater, quite a raucous bird. Most honeyeaters are quite raucous and aggressive, but This one is very, very raucous. And one of the most stunning ones, I think, is a small bird called a Mizamila. This is red-headed Mizamila. They kind of fill the gap between honeyeaters and sunbirds, really. They're very, very small honeyeaters. And white-gaped honeyeater, a very plain-looking bird with this white gape around the bill. This is a useful bird, though, because the alarm call of this bird gets a lot of other birds agitated and can help locate other birds. One such bird is the white-breasted whistler. And this bird is quite difficult to get in the mangroves because it's often on the seaward side of the mangroves. So you have to be in amongst the crocodiles or in a very safe area to get this bird. Boats often help. Another similar species of same family, whistler. This is the mangrove golden whistler. This has got an absolutely fantastic song. This bird actually doesn't just stay in the coastal mangroves, so this bird does actually follow rivers inland and can be in the riparian forests along the big rivers that come out from the north coast. Very, very narrow distribution band though. Northern fantail. This is a fly-catching type bird. Usually fantails fan their tail, and that's why they're called fantails. The northern fantail is atypical in that it doesn't fan its tail. It just tends to fly around with its tail closed, which is one of the good identification features for it if you only see a brief view. A few of the little birds that pop around in the mangroves. We have canary white-eye, paper bark flycatcher, and lemon-bellied fly robin. This is one of the Australian robin birds. Orange-footed scrub fowl. This is a megapode, builds a huge nest mound. They occur across the north of Australia. These birds actually will be right in Perth city centre. You see them in the median strips and the road, dragging leaves across right through the CBD of Darwin. It's pretty bizarre to see, really. A few of the other city birds, red-collared lorikeet, similar to the rainbow lorikeet that we see further south and east, and bar-shouldered dove. This is another common dove, but very beautiful. It has this bronzy sheen on the back of its neck. Common but nice bird. Darwin is also very good for a few owls. Rufus owl here is one of the giant Ninox hawk owls. There's another bird sat off next to it. They were roosting here. A big fig tree, and this is barking owl. I was tempted to play a sound clip of barking owl, like I played some sound clips last time, but I declined to play it this time because in case people have got dogs, because this does actually sound very much like a dog barking. And this particular bird, I was photographing it, and a dog ran around underneath it, and it started barking at the dog, and the dog was very confused and was looking around trying to see where this other dog was in the tree. So if you've got Zeno Canto, I'd drop on there and type in barking owl and have a listen to it. It is a woof woof kind of noise. So moving inland from the city, we hit some of these water bodies, these huge lakes. They're incredibly impressive. Huge numbers of wildfowl. This is Magpie Goose, black and white magpie goose. A species that's had a very checkered history in Australia, but it's doing well now. A few of the other ducks, green pygmy goose and cotton pygmy goose. These are tiny little things, smaller than a mallard kind of duck. Australasian swamp hen. You get gatherings of 200, 300, 400 of these just parading around in the grass on the edge of these lakes. White-necked heron. So this is about the size of a great egret, also known as Pacific heron if you follow the Clements taxonomy. Very striking bird, especially in flight actually. Similar but much smaller and prettier is the pied heron. This is smaller than a snowy egret kind of bird. And on some of these water holes, you can get flocks of 500, 600 of them, all just feeding out in the open. But they're very restricted range in Australia. You only really get them in that area. Okay, and then one of the absolutely humongous birds. This is Jabaru. It's not a Jabaru that you know, of course, in Americas. This is black-necked stork. The local name, interestingly, the indigenous name is Jabaru, and the town that I stay in Kakadu is called Jabaru, and they have lots of statues of this bird and images of this bird. It's a very interesting bird in that area. It's absolutely staggering bird. It's over 1.5 meters tall, I think. It's scarce, but in the Kakadu, the wetlands of Kakadu, you do see them fairly well. A few of the raptors that you also get in this area: Pacific Baza and Australian hobby. There are a few of the old world orioles you get in this area. This area of this one's in a fig by the look of it. This is green oriole, and then olive-backed oriole, and then Australasian figbird, which is also a member of the oriole family. The three species are very vocal. They fill the air with a lot of sounds, beautiful flute-like calls. There are a few fruit doves in that part of Australia. This is the rose-crowned fruit dove. Always difficult to get pictures of fruit doves. I find they generally spend a lot of time high up in the trees, but this one, well, not excellent. You can actually see the nice pinky colour on the forehead there. Varied triller. This bird is it's quite difficult to connect with sometimes in Australia, but in the Northern Territory they seem really common. This is a different subspecies here. To the eastern side, this one has quite a bit of orangey rufus underneath. One of the main birds that people like to see in the Northern Territory, in the top end of the Northern Territory, is rainbow pitter. I'm a pitter person. I try and see pitters everywhere I can. It's my favourite family, so seeing the pitter is always a bit of a thrill. But this one is really impressive. Just the black and then the shining bright blue. It's a really gorgeous bird. And it's often in the monsoon forests around Darwin and across the north. So we're going to move inland from some of these areas into some of the different habitats here. The sandstone escarpments that you find at Kakadu. This is an example of the rock art here. It's difficult to see in the photo. This is allegedly, apparently, people dancing. If you zoom in or look closely, there are allegedly people dancing on here. And the next one here, I'm interpreting this as someone hunting a kangaroo. There are lots of a few sites with lots of rock art there, and I've got a few pictures on my phone that I was able to drop in here. Like Luke mentioned at the beginning, I've been stuck in Bali since March, so I haven't got access to everything that I've got. So these are just the pictures that I had on my phone at the time. But they're really interesting. There's whole boardwalks around the rocks here showcasing all of the art, and the area is actually really great for birds as well, specialist birds of the region, such as the black-tailed tree creeper. There's no woodpeckers in Australia. They don't get across the Wallace line, which is a few hundred miles from where I am at the moment. So there's other species that have evolved to fill the woodpecker niche in Australia. These tree creepers are not related to the brown creeper in America. They're a totally different family. Similar to the tree creepers is the varied Citella. These birds run up and down. They're very much like a nuthatch. Note the white supercilium on this bird. Later on in the talk, I'll show you another subspecies. There's at least 5 subspecies of this bird, and there's potential that they might get split as well in the future. Okay, some of the pigeons here. Partridge pigeon is one of the specialist birds of the area. This usually ground-dwelling pigeon popped up in a tree for me, which was a bit of a surprise. In amongst the rocks, you get sandstone shrike thrush. This bird hiding on the rocks. And also in amongst the rocks, you have another pigeon, the chestnut-quilled rock pigeon. This bird's really quite difficult to catch up with at times. You've got to walk around the rocks looking at them and waiting for one to walk into view. They spend an awful lot of time hiding out of view. When they fly, you can actually see the chestnut quills in the wings there. Another pigeon that you get in the area, restricted range in Australia, is the black-banded fruit dove. Also here, looking for the little birds to lay its eggs in the nest. This is the little bronze cuckoo. It's about 14 centimeters long. This is a tiny little bird. Much bigger than the cuckoo, the bowerbird. This is great bowerbird. If you did see my Eastern Australia tour, you would have seen the bower I showed of this bird that was in the schoolyard, the one that was collecting chili peppers and snail shells and pencils. This one's a little bit more out in the country, less people influence. Kookaburra, the blue-winged kookaburra. This is the kingfisher of the area. You even see them out at night, actually, around street lights in Jabaru, looking for food. And one of the big diurnal predators is the pied butcherbird. Beautiful song, but a bit of a killer bill. And then moving out of the area a little bit further south, we're getting hooded parrot. This is why we go down to the Pine Creek Township. There's a very good area here for hooded parrot, which is a difficult restricted bird in Australia, and it's also great for finches. This is one of the most common and widespread finches. This is zebra finch, double-barred finch, masked finch. This is long-tailed finch. You also get black-throated finch, which is very similar but without the long graduated tail. Crimson finch, and then one of the big finches that everyone really wants to see is the Gouldian Finch. Absolutely spectacular bird, and some of the water holes around Pine Creek Township and in that general region, you can get flocks of hundreds and hundreds of finches if there's water in any of the little streams there. And yeah, it's a great place to be, you know, early morning or late evening as they come and drink. Whirling flocks of finches is pretty amazing to see. So that generally wraps up the northern section. It's basically 9 days in about 15 minutes. So I've skirted over an awful lot of what we do see, but hopefully that gives you an idea of that general area. If anyone's got any specific questions, I have not seen anything specific come up on the chat, so I'll probably just carry on. Does that seem okay, Luke?
Yeah, no specific questions. Jennifer just mentioned that she saw a bunch of those giant birds at the Darwin Military Museum when they're building their piles. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But no questions.
Okay.
And that stork was awesome.
Yeah, the stork's really impressive. You do get it in India as well in certain areas, but it's a really amazing bird there, and I find the fact that it's got the same name local name as what's used in America is quite interesting as well. So, I'll move on to the next section, which is a very short, just under a week, drop in to Alice Springs. So Alice Springs is a very, very different area to either of these other two areas we're going to go to. Much drier. This area, this has had some rain. You can tell by the flowers, the wildflowers near the track here. Very, very dry desert area. Very different birding, and we'll go and have a quick look at some of the birds here. Crow. There's a few species of corvids. I have to say corvid, not covids. A few species of corvids in Australia. They all look fairly similar, to be honest. Sounds are a little bit different, and there are subtle differences. This is little crow, often forms flocks, and is fairly common around the town of Alice Springs. Another very common bird that you see every day around the city is Magpie Lark, which is actually a monarch flycatcher. One of the most beautiful birds, I think, in Australia is the rainbow bee-eater. This bird showed phenomenally well for us last year. Another bowerbird. This is western bowerbird. It's found around the city in the town of Alice Springs in people's gardens, which is quite nice. They make quite a small bower, and they tend to spend a lot of time sat in the trees above watching what's going on. A few of the common parrots that you get in the Alice area is galah. This is a very widespread species. This is the Australian ringneck. Also, this subspecies is known as the Port Lincoln parrot. Very, very common in that part of Australia. Some of the smaller birds you get here. This is the red-browed pardalote. And then looking for the small birds that it can lay its eggs in, this is the black-eared cuckoo. And some of the species that the cuckoos like going after are the honeyeaters. This is the white-fronted honeyeater. You can see, if you can see the very little red dot at the back of the eye there. This is the grey, let me just see, yeah, grey-fronted honeyeater. And this is the pallid cuckoo, another cuckoo that likes to go after honeyeaters. And here, if you can see this, this is the grey-fronted honeyeater at the top of the picture in the centre, feeding a young pallid cuckoo. You can see the size difference. The pallid cuckoo is a much, much larger bird than the honeyeater, but it's still giving it a good shot at feeding it. This is a very nice view I've got of a grey-headed honeyeater. And there's also a few different animals here, such as Uluru, which is a bit like a cross between a wallaby and a kangaroo. This is a mother here with the baby just out of the pouch and wandering around by itself, but having a careful eye looked on it. And then as we get out from the city a little bit, you start getting some more of the bush birds. This is an emu, or an emu's head, sorry, wrong button. Close up of an emu. Some different parrots out this way. This is Mulga Parrot. Cockatiel. Nice to see these in the wild. This is the budgerigar. Everyone will be familiar with this one as well, I'm sure, but it's pretty impressive seeing flocks of thousands of them when you do get that occurrence. And one of the most spectacular, this is Major Mitchell's cockatoo, or also known as pink cockatoo. And this one, it's not an amazing picture. This is Burke's parrot. This is actually a crepuscular parrot, so it's very unusual to see it during the day. They generally, you see them coming into water holes at night, just after dusk or pre-dawn. So seeing one during the daytime is quite unusual. They often sit in the shade out of view. Sorry, a bit trigger happy. Here's an inland dotterel, also one of these desert wandering shorebirds, and flock bronzewing. Some of the treats that you might find if you're out at night. There are a couple of other doves in the area as well. This is the diamond dove, and one of the coolest of them all, I think, the Spinifex pigeon. This is very quail-like bird, runs around very quickly on the ground. If you can see in the picture, the very long crest that streaks up several inches above the head. It's a scarce bird, and it's yeah, very, very spectacular looking little creature. Okay. But there are plenty of other birds out in this area. This is the Wedgetail Eagle. Just they were sat around on the edge of a road. Often big scavengers. They can take kangaroos, but they often scavenge on the side of a road. So if you ever see something dead in the road, it's always worth just slowing down, because there's likely to be eagles stood around there. Huge things like a golden eagle, but with a massive elongated tail. One of the other special raptors of the area is the black-breasted buzzard, with these two big white bullseyes on its wings. Both of those birds have big dihedrals, so you pick them out barreling around high up in the sky usually. A few of the other little bush birds here. This is hooded robin. And a couple of fairy wrens. These are the purple-backed fairy wrens, a male on the left, assuming your screen's not flipped around. The male is the colourful one, and the female is the drab one. I did see a question pop up about males and females. A lot of the birds I've actually shown are the males and females look the same. A few of them I've got male onlys, but to be honest, the majority of birds that I've shown you, the sexes are similar. There's a few birds that I've just shown males. Finches, for example, I think were mainly males, but most of the birds that I've shown so far have had sexes are similar. Another one of the fairy wrens. This is pretty splendid. This is splendid fairy wren. Absolutely stunning bird. There's no way around that. Equally colourful, a different colour. This is the crimson chat, which is actually not a chat, is actually a honeyeater, apparently. Another tree creeper, we showed you black-tailed earlier. This is white-browed tree creeper. This has a patchy distribution with a couple of subspecies through Australia, potential splits, I guess. And this is just like a view of some of the dry Spinifex areas. You get these little rolling hills in the landscape here. The clumps of vegetation are really sharp Spinifex grass. It's not looking particularly healthy at the moment because it's fairly dry out there. Few interesting animals out here. This is the blue state of the red kangaroo. This is almost the same size as me, it's almost 6 foot tall sort of thing, big, beefy guy. And a dingo, the wild dog. Okay, so we're coming up to the last few birds of the area, some of the special birds. They're not necessarily the most colourful, but they're often the most sought. This is the dusky grass wren. Several grass wrens in Australia. More each year as the scientific work's being done on them. There's yet more to come. Generally very, very secretive birds. This is dusky grass wren that hangs around those little ridges that you could see in the background of that photo there. This is banded whiteface. You also get southern whiteface, which looks similar but without the band, and then there's chestnut breasted as well. Then this is chirruping wedgebill. It's an interesting bird, has a beautiful song, not much to look at. It's a bit like a cardinal, I guess, that kind of thing, or the unpronounceable bird from southeast Arizona, but a different color. And one of the other big targets that we look for out in the desert is the cinnamon quail thrush. It's a bit like a thrush, a bit like a quail. They have a very, very, very high pitch call, that is, if you've got hearing problems, you won't hear it. It's one of the way to pick them up, really. They have a very, very high-pitched seeping call, and you see them running around between the bushes, sparse bushes that you get out there. And then there's one other thing that people like to see out this way, Uluru, Ayers Rock, huge monolith that comes out of the ground there. It's a big feature of historic importance to the native people. So basically that very quickly wraps up the red center. So if there's any specific questions to that, Luke, I can take those.
Yeah, so no questions specific to red center, but a few like a question about best field guide for Australia. Is there crossover between Australia and New Zealand birds? A question about what your tours are like. Do you want to take those at the end after this? Or do you want to do those now?
I'll take those ones at the end. I'll take those ones at the end, yep.
Okay.
Yep, no problem. Yep, okay, cool. So we're going to drop down into Southwest Australia now. This area is very, very different to those other areas that we've covered. I really like this. Well, I like all areas in Australia, but this area is very interesting from a plant side of things as well. This part of Australia is clearly joined to southern South Africa. The plants are very, very similar. So it's very interesting from a floristic point of view there. The wildflower, I haven't got any pictures of the wildflowers in the show, so I don't have access to them. Again, we're not planning on being in Bali at the moment. But the plants over in this part of Australia are phenomenal. And there's some really amazing forests out there, huge forest, giant trees. But we're going to do a little circuit here. We're going to start in Perth, and then we're going to gradually go southeast through a woodland area called Dryandra Woodland, which is a dry, eucalypt-filled woodland, very sparse trees. It's very important for a mammal there called the numbat. It's a very, very restricted range, endangered mammal. And then we go down to the Stirling Ranges, which is an incredibly floristically diverse place. That's where you get hundreds of species of orchids and a different set of birds. Then down to, you'll see at the bottom, a place called Chains Beach. This area is home to 3 of the most difficult birds in Australia to see. And that's one of the things we focus on the tour. I get a lot of family listers that come on tours, and there's one bird down there that they want to see, and I'll explain that when we get down there. Then we're going to go across to Augusta and Busselton on the coast. Augusta, down that area, you're at the southwesternmost tip of Australia, and there's a nice lighthouse on the end there, which is often good for some sea watching and the parrot that you get down on the rocks down there. So it's a nice little circuit, this 9 days. These tours all run straight after each other, so you can do 9 days and 6 days, or 6 days and 9 days, or 9, 6, 9 days, or just do one on their own. So they work well together or on their own. So let's take a look here at these. So we're going to start off in Perth, in the city, a rainbow lorikeet. Now, this bird is primarily in the east, and I think has been introduced out into the west. It's making a bit of a toehold over there. Stunning bird, but you know, it is very common, but it's absolutely stunning still. Another of the common birds that you get around the city, this is spotted pardalote, similar to the red-browed pardalote I showed earlier. You also get striated pardalote, which isn't quite as pretty as this, in my opinion. You get them both around the city. They're often breeding around the hotel I stay at in Perth in the city, so you get some nice views. Another of the introduced species, but from an Australian standpoint, this is a great bird to see for your Australian list. This is laughing dove. It's basically only found around that Perth general area in Australia. Introduced from Africa or India, where it naturally occurs. native. There's a lot of water actually around Perth. It's a beautiful city, really nice city, lots of water, which offers some really fantastic birding around the city. So this is black swan. You also get flocks of hundreds of Australian shelduck, which are beautiful birds, and blue-billed ducks and freckled ducks, and a lot of the birds that I put photos of in the eastern tour, the ducks, which I didn't put in this talk. One of the interesting birds that you get around the fringes of the lakes here is the spotless crake. They're generally quite secretive, but for some reason this one decided to walk out in the open, so we took that chance and enjoyed that view. So moving out of the city into some of the woodland areas. Sorry, I'm trigger happy. I'm just slipping and pressing too quickly. This is elegant parrot. There's a genre of parrots in Australia called the neophemas, and we'll see one right at the end of this talk, and then this is another one. And those that saw my Eastern talk will have maybe remember the orange-bellied parrot, the critically endangered bird from Tasmania, and the gorgeous turquoise parrot. They're the two flashy ones, but these ones are subtly just as nice, I guess. This is elegant parrot, fairly common in some of the dry woodlands of southwest Australia. Rosella, this is western rosella. Eastern rosella in the east, northern in the north, and then this is western rosella. This is one of the smallest rosellas. One of the most gaudy parrots possibly in Australia. This is red-capped parrot, it's endemic to the southwest. And then Rufus tree creeper. So similar to the other two tree creepers I've shown you, but this one seems to spend a lot more time on the ground foraging. Very vocal as well. It's worth mentioning actually that the southwest Australia is floristically diverse and also faunally diverse from most of the rest of Australia, cut off by huge desert areas, and there's quite a large zone of endemism there. And more research has been done all the time on the species splits between eastern and western Australia. So currently there's, I don't know, 15, 20 endemic birds to the southwest, but over time that will increase. There's several species that are distinct that haven't been split yet, that probably will get split going forward. Okay, so go through. Okay, so this next one is the blue-breasted Fairywren, the bird that was on the front cover image. Delightful little birds. Sometimes they can be tricky to show, but this one was showing quite nicely. Honeyeaters again. This is the yellow-plumed honeyeater. This is one of the most aggressive honeyeaters in the region that does chase off a lot of other birds, smaller birds, such as this is a western thornbill. There's lots of different thornbills and Gerignes, little brown warbler birds that you get in the red center as well that I didn't show, but these they're very similar to this. This is western thornbill. And if you remember the Citella I showed you earlier with the white supercilium, this is a different subspecies of the varied Citella. Potential split, I think, is very distinctive. And again, western whistler. This bird is a recent split from the Australian golden whistler complex. Beautiful song. And western yellow robin. We did show the eastern yellow robin in the eastern talk. This is the western equivalent. Another robin here, this is Scarlet Robin. And again, the birds here in the west are different to those in Tasmania in the east, so potential split. And one of the other pretty robins from the area, this is red-capped robin. There's a few endemic parrots that you get in this area. I've shown a few of them already. This is another one. This is the western corella. This is a very restricted range species. The numbers are increasing over recent years, but this is still a rare bird. Then you have the black cockatoos. This is Borden's or Bordan's black cockatoo. It has quite a long upper mandible. Used to be known as long-billed black cockatoo, I think. And then this is the other one. This is Carnaby's, or the shorter billed. The two of them are quite similar. You've got to get good views of them. This one's on the side of a road. They were feeding on some spilt grain that you often get interspersed around all of these amazing forests. There's huge agricultural areas, and so there's often transportations carrying grain around, and when the grain gets spilt, you often get a lot of these parrots on the side of a road. Some of the other honeyeaters that you get in the area, this is Gilbert's honeyeater. And then one of the other potential splits, this bird is a crested shrike tit at the moment. This is the western subspecies, which would become western shrike tit. It's a much talked about split, and hopefully will happen soon. They're quite different. Huge shrike-like bill. Looks like a bit like a great tit that you get in the UK. Really impressive birds. They rip the bark off the trees. You can hear them before you see them damaging stuff, basically. Overhead in the same area where we usually get the shrike tits, there's usually nesting little eagles with a nice white band through the wing there. And then in the trees around our accommodation, there's often Australian owlet nightjars roosting. They often stick their heads out at dusk, give you a little look. And then in the same general area, there's a western grey kangaroo. You see the little joey, little baby's head sticking out the mother's pouch there. And they're just coming down to a little water hole. If you find water holes in this area, it's always worth just staking them out in the late afternoon, see what comes down to drink. You often get pigeons and animals coming in. Short-beaked echidna. This is a monotreme. This is an egg-laying mammal. Very interesting. A bit like a hedgehog type niche, I guess. Long snout. And then this is the key mammal that we like to try and get in the area. This is numbat. So this is it's rare in that it's a diurnal mammal. Most mammals in Australia are nocturnal, just because of the predation side of things. It's safer for them to be out at night. They actually eat termites. They're a bit like I don't know. They're very unique. They're rare. They're only found in this one area. Yeah, so they're always worth finding. There's this area of woodland. There's often lots of natural tree falls. You know, the trees grow. They just fall over, and it creates a lot of habitat for termites. And so they're always running around finding things, but they're not easy to find. But they are very enjoyable to watch when they are there. They look a bit like meerkats. They behave a bit like meerkats, often standing up and looking around. So moving a little bit further south now, down onto the coast, some of the beautiful birds that you get down there. This is fairly common and widespread species, though. This is common bronzewing. It spends a lot of time on the ground. It's a ground pigeon, basically. Beautiful colour in the wing when the light catches it. And a close relative of this is the brush bronzewing. Much more secretive, this one, usually, but it's slightly different coloration. And brown quail. This one actually walked up and sat at the end of my feet, which was quite interesting. Some more cuckoos that you get in this general area, generally causing a little bit of an issue with the smaller birds. This is Phanto Cuckoo, and this is shining bronze cuckoo. These are both migratory birds in Australia. They move around quite a lot, but they like predating things like scrub wrens and honeyeaters for their nests. Splendid Fairywren. This is a different subspecies to the one that I pictured earlier. You see the blue is a totally different color. This is a pretty insane looking bird, to be honest, and just hops around the accommodation we stay at. This is a recent split again, one of these east-west splits. This is spotted Scrub Ren. This used to be part of white-browed Scrub Ren that doesn't have the spots on the breast in most subspecies. This is quite, excuse me, this is quite a striking bird. And I've actually seen this feeding the Fantail Cuckoo young birds. Most years, actually. Most years I've been there, they've been feeding cuckoos. This is the white-breasted robin, very similar to the yellow robins, but without the yellow, to be honest. It's an endemic to the southwest of Australia. Here it is on the lawn outside my room. The 4 little brown balls in front of it are kangaroo poop from this one. This is western grey kangaroo with a joey in the pouch. She's just hopping around outside my bedroom, which is quite a nice sight to see. A couple of the other honey eaters that you get in this region. This is western wattlebird, the bird on the right, and it's actually next to a purple-crowned lorikeet, which is a tiny nectivorous lorikeet. The western wattlebird can be a pain. It can be very common one year and then just disappear the next. But it's one of the specialties. Again, it's another east-west split recent times. New Holland honeyeater. It's one of my favourite birds in Australia. I think they're just gorgeous. Not too shabby also is the western spinebill. It's another small honeyeater. And then similar to the New Holland honeyeater, but with a darker eye and the black and white's a different pattern. This is white-cheeked honeyeater. This likes the heath banksia. You see it's in a banksia there, the plant. They like this kind of environment, the coastal heathland, as too does southern emu wren. So these are 2 of the birds that you get in this heathland on the coast. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's 3 really difficult birds in Australia to see. One of them is possibly one of the most difficult. So while we're in that area, we look out for those, but you do have to be careful because sometimes your eye will be dragged over to something that isn't the target bird, such as this southern brown bandicoot, which looks a bit like a rat, granted in this picture, but it's not, I can assure you. And then this tiny little creature, if you can see this in amongst the flowers, is a honey possum. It's literally a couple of inches, 1.5 to 2 inches long. You see the long tail hanging down there. This picture was taken almost on dusk. It's a really, really tiny little creature. And then, so now we're on to the 3 difficult birds. This is what a lot of the serious people want to see, shall we say. There's 3 birds here, and they're all 3 different families, endemic families to Australia, which don't have large numbers of birds. So family listers are quite keen on this little site here. So the first one of these is possibly the easiest one of the 3 to see. This is western bristlebird. They spend a lot of time, all 3 of these birds spend a lot of time on the ground in inaccessible areas, and which makes them really difficult to see. This is western bristlebird. One of the early passerines had been research done on it. The way it holds its tail is more like that rather than like that, if you can see me. So more vertical rather than horizontal. Very ancient song, voice boxes. The next one is a bird that I was telling my clients never comes out in the open, and then it proceeded to climb to the top of this banksia and sing out in the open for 5 minutes. There is actually a really, really good sound recording that one of my clients took of this bird on Zeno Canto. It just sat out in the open for a good 5 minutes, just singing its head off. That's an unusual good view, to be honest. Usually you get bits and pieces of them. Occasionally they will sit out. This used to be called western whipbird. Species that's now just been split into two species, but may go further actually. Again, beautiful song, a very secretive bird. Now the star attraction is the next bird. The next bird is a species that there are only 2 members in the family, noisy scrub bird and Rufus scrub bird, both endemic to Australia, both with absolutely minuscule distributions. The Rufus scrub bird is found in eastern Australia, and it is found in dense forest. And basically, the easiest place to get it is, an 8-kilometer hike into the forest and hope that it hops out on a forest trail, which I've done and which I've seen. But it's not really a sort of place where you're going to pin many hopes on getting a group of people onto it. So that makes this next bird, noisy scrub bird, the best place in the world to see this family, the scrub bird family. And this is it. So this is the best picture I have of this bird, and it's probably one of the better photos there is of this bird. This bird is incredibly shy. It walks around underneath the vegetation. I've been lying on the ground and had this bird 6 inches away from me, and you can't see it. So you have to wait and hope it crosses a road, which it does fairly frequently during the evening. As you can see, this the light on this bird, the sun was literally just setting, and so it's really lit this bird up. And this is a good, it doesn't look like a great photo, but trust me, this is a good view of this bird. It's the first time you actually really get to see the markings and color on it. Usually if you see it, it's a much quicker hop across the trail. So this is the best place to see this family in the world. So that's one of the main targets here. And this bird is running towards this beautiful beach. This is called Chains Beach in right in the south of Australia here, southwest Australia. Beautiful big white sandy beaches with the coastal heathland here. And it does have its own, own good birds in the area, such as, the white-bellied sea eagles that are often going ahead. Pied oystercatcher, red-capped plover, and then the gorgeous and endangered hooded plover, an Australian endemic. A few other birds that we get, just in this centre, going right down to the point of Australia that I alluded to earlier. This is Pacific gull with an absolutely ginormous bill. Australasian gannets. Shy albatross. The point of the coast there is good early morning. Often the albatrosses are blown inland, and they get to a point where they don't really know where they are, and then it's light and suddenly they're near land, so it's a good chance to see them. And then the final bird of the talk, one of the specialties of the coastal region, is another of the Neophema parrots. This is rock parrot. It's found sporadically across the south of Australia on the rocky coast, and it spends a lot of time in the rocks and picking out seeds from the flowers right along the coast. And there you go. That's the end of the talk. I think I've more or less kept in time this time. So hopefully you enjoyed the talk. Yeah, a few birds of 3 of the areas I love in Australia, to go with the 2 areas that are just as good in the eastern half of Australia. So there you go.
Yeah, Andy, that's great. I love checking out all the pictures. Just wish I could be there. So someday, definitely. We do have a few different questions here. First, let's hit on what's your favorite field guide for birds of Australia?
The new field guide is leaps and bounds above the others. It's called the Australian Bird Guide. It's not really a field guide as such. It's a little bit too big to go in your pocket. But by the nature of Australian birding, you spend a lot of time in your vehicles driving around between sites. You usually drive, between sites, and then you get out and walk a loop, and then get back in your vehicle, drive, do another loop, because you're covering large areas. So, you can carry it around in your bag, but it is a little bit too big. But it is, illustration-wise and taxonomy-wise, it's fairly up to date. It's an excellent field guide. There are some apps. I have a couple of apps that I use, primarily because they've got sound clips on, but the illustrations are pretty woeful, to be honest. But we do have some literature, I think, on the field guides on the website. I can look into that. But definitely the Australian Bird Guide is the best book to get.
I just put the link, the Amazon link to that book in the chat. So if anyone wants to check it out. I also put the Zeno Canto link to the barking owl. So
the barking owl.
yeah, so I'm gonna look that up next year pretty soon. But
Yeah,
so
I have a recording of it on my phone, but I don't want to play it in case anyone's got dogs or cats.
yeah, my cat would go crazy. Someone asked if there was much crossover between bird species in Australia and bird species in New Zealand. Are they pretty separate, or is there a lot of crossover?
They're quite different in some regards. As New Zealand's got an awful lot of endemic birds. There are some Australian birds that have occurred naturally to Australia. Some of the more exploratory or migratory Australian birds do occur in New Zealand. And there's also been Australian birds that have been released in New Zealand, as well as English birds that have been released in New Zealand. So when you go to New Zealand, you get this interesting mix of pure native New Zealand birds. Most of those are endemic and restricted range, and then you get the more widespread Australian natural immigrants or natural migrants, and then you get the other birds that have been introduced from Eurasia and Australia. So it's a bit of a mix. I saw the mention of pukeko, which is basically the swamp hen. So yes, New Zealand calls pukeko, but the rest of the world calls that swamp hen. It's the same species. Yeah.
Great. Hey, so some questions about your tours. Are your tours mostly by vehicles? So like you're in a van and driving around, or what does that normally look like for you?
Yeah, so the tours do cover a lot of ground. Usually we have vehicles, vehicles we drive between places, and we would usually, sometimes you get to a site and you might spend all morning at a site. Other times you would, when you're going, say for Alice Springs, there's a lot of birds around a couple of botanic gardens that you get there that we would spend a chunk of time. You literally drive there and spend the morning walking around. Other areas, when you're going for more of a desert birding, you tend to drive and then look out for birds or look out for suitable habitat along certain routes that I have. So I would get to a point and I would maybe, I've got it all on GPS. So I'd get to this point, we'd get out and we'd do maybe a 20-minute, 30-minute walk around looking for certain birds, get back in the vehicle, freshen up, drive to the next spot, and then do the same sort of thing. Just because it's desert birding, so there's certain areas, there's certain birds. You might get to a patch of habitat that doesn't look particularly good, or you might find a bit of where there's been a shower burst and there's some wildflowers, and so it goes a bit like that. On some of the other tours, like the say the Southwest tour, we'll be at that Chains Beach area, and we basically park the vehicle there and don't do much driving at all for the 2 days. You're literally just walking around that area morning and afternoon, and sitting out waiting for those rare species to show. It's a mix really, but none of the walking in Australia on any of those tours is difficult. It's all relatively flat. Australia is the flattest continent in the world, and those areas we are going to are on those 3 tours are all pretty much flat. There may be rocky grounds and it's hot, but you guys will be used to that, I think.
Yeah, we are. What time, speaking of hot or different seasons, what time of the year is best to go birding in Australia?
Really, I do my tours there from say September to December. That part of the year is probably the best. The temperatures are good, they're bearable, the bird activity is good. The last 3 or 4 months of the year are good. after the new year, January, February, March, it generally is too hot pretty much everywhere, and the bird activity is kind of different. At the time of year where our tours are scheduled, it's usually when the bird activity is peaking. There's the migrants are in, the birds are breeding, so a little bit more active as well. That's the key, one of the key aspects. Yeah.
If you've never been to Australia or this part of Australia, which one of these trips would you recommend someone just starting out? Which one would you tell someone to do this one first?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult. The Western Australia tour, you can fly into Perth. It's a really nice city, and on that tour you're going to see several hundred species, and you're going to get a good mix of birds that occur in the different regions, as well as all of the specialities that occur in that region, and you get a good mix of Australian birds and wildlife. The Northern Territory one is the top end tour. Again, that's a really amazing tour. You're going to get a load of birds. You're going to get a mix of all different birds from different habitats, some of the Australian waterfowl. Those two tours are really, really good. I wouldn't pick the Alice Springs tour as a first tour to go to. That's in there mainly as an extension to either of the other two tours, and there's great birds, but on that tour you're not going to see 300 species like you would do on the other tours. You're going to see smaller number of species, but what you do see on that Alice Springs tour is going to be more or less restricted to those drier areas. So of the three tours I've talked about, those two tours are great starting points. And as I mentioned on the East Coast tour, the East Coast is a great place to start with as well. I mean, flying in, it's easy to fly into Melbourne and drop down to Tasmania and do Tasmania and the East Coast. But basically, any of those tours are great for first-time visits to Australia. The Alice Springs one is the one that more focuses on the more tricky species.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Andy. Yeah, it's not just the birds either, but some of the mammals you were showing was just amazing. So I'm also going to be including in the follow-up email a link to the YouTube record. I'm going to link the recording from the last one onto YouTube, and I'll put that into the follow-up email tomorrow. So if anyone missed the first session that Andy did with us back in August, don't worry, you'll get to see that one too. I'll put it in the follow-up email tomorrow. So last question, what lens do you use to take all these great pictures?
So the majority of these photos are taken on my Canon 100 to 400 lens. I've got a Canon, I don't know, 5 or 7 or something like that. I don't know. It's a 100 to 400 lens. I'm not really a photographer at all. These are basically just point and shoots. So it gives you an idea. If you're a proper photographer, you get some nice shots on these tours. Because these are the majority of these are taken during a tour.
Really a photographer. Oh man, you can't say that. These are awesome pictures.
But most of them have been taken.
You're definitely
tour.
A photographer. It looks great.
Well, yeah, thank you. No, I mean the camera does the work. It's the Canon that everyone has. All birders seem to have this Canon. I picked it up at the biggest week last year. 100 to 400 Mark II Canon, I guess. I'll let you know on the thing. I'll have to get it out and have a look. I think it's an EOS 5 Mark II or 7 Mark II. I always get them confused.
Well, whatever it is, it's working for you. Well, thanks again, Andy. We really appreciate you being here and taking the time out of your morning. I know you got some other things you gotta get going on today. You know, big thanks to Birding Ecotours too. I know that Chris Lotz and Jacob Roloff and all Dylan and all the guys there, like, you guys are great partners. So thanks for all you guys do for the birding world.
Thank you very much. I just mentioned that I've got 2 places left on my 2021 December Western Australia tour. The last 2 places, we only do small groups. I should mention that. All the tours have a maximum of 8 people. So I've got 2 places left on the December 2021 tour. I've traveled with the other people that are on the tour, and it's, you know, a nice group of people. We are still running as you see on the screen, if it's still shared, there's 5% off at the moment, and then we're donating another 5% of that tour cost to the local guides around the world who have not had any work for the last 8 months or so, and probably won't have for a year, all in all. So yeah, there's dates on the website if anyone wants to look at that. And if there's any specific questions, please feel free. My contact will be in the email, and yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone, and hopefully get to see some of you over there and show you some of these amazing birds.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks again. And yeah, to all of you who joined us today, or this evening, or this morning, wherever it may be where you're at. Appreciate being here. I see Sandy Ellers here. Good to see you, Sandy. One of our awesome volunteers. So it's just really good to see faces. Feel free to take yourself off of mute if you want. Say goodbye verbally to Andy, and then we'll head out.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Andy.
Thanks a lot, Andy.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks,
great.
guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you.
All right, see you later.